Hi, Rebecca Skeele here, wisdom teacher and heaven on earth mentor. And this is video number 3, chapter 2 of Manifesting Your Sacred Ambition, harnessing vision and power to bring your sacred calling to the world in service to your greater good and to the greater good. And we're going to do chapter 2 today. And again, if you have your ebook handy, you can follow along with me and your study guide. And several of you have just asked again, how do you get the ebooks? I want to say that the ebook is complimentary. Just go to my webpage. There's a link here on this YouTube page. And you can go to my webpage, and all you do is enter your name and email address. You immediately get the ebook. You can download it and the study guide. And also there will be some bonuses that you also get along the way. So if you like me to have the book, feel free to download the ebook. And also, I do have a few hard copies left, and you will receive an email that will tell you if you'd like a hard copy. Looks like this. All you have to do is just send me your snail mail, and I will mail one to you. There you have it. Because this is really a booklet. It's the first 5 chapters of a much larger book that I am writing on sacred ambition and sacred callings. All right, so let's get into chapter 2. Chapter 2, Sacred Ambitions, begin with sacred callings. A sacred ambition begins with a sacred calling. Sacred calls can emerge from the deep heart stirrings as a longing that has been whispering you awake for eons, or like a bolt of lightning shaking you awake in one startling moment of clarity. Let's talk about sacred callings today. These 2 ways of sacred callings coming forward are very common in my life and in the lives of others that I have worked with for many years. Sacred callings, first of all, can often be emerging over many, many decades. We get glimpses of it, we get flashes of it when we're younger, let's say, and yet because of life, wherever we are in our life, whatever's happening in our life, we get distracted. We go, oh, that's for later, I'll do that later, I'll get to that one of these days. Oh, I'd love to do that, but right now I'm XYZ. And this is often the way sacred ambitions come forward. They emerge, but they don't leave us alone. And as we go through life, and life happens to us in all kinds of ways and manners, there becomes a point, though, in our life where we realize, okay, now is the time. And this was very much my journey for me back in 2005 when I began to teach my wisdom school. It's actually called a Heaven on Earth Wisdom School. And at that time, I did not realize that I was teaching my sacred calling. I just knew that this was what was downloaded to me, and this was what I wanted to teach, and it was all about self-mastery and really bringing the heaven of who you are forward in your life. And yet, what I realized when I started teaching it is that it was my sacred calling. And the way that I articulate my sacred calling now is that my sacred calling is co-creating heaven on earth, one person at a time. But many, many years ago, when I started trying to talk about this, I could not do it without weeping. A lot of times I couldn't find the words for it. A lot of times I didn't even open my mouth and say anything because I was so overwhelmed by what this is and who am I? I'm just an ordinary person, and what do you mean heaven on earth? Etc., etc., etc. So oftentimes this is how sacred callings show up. And I think it's grace, quite honestly, that it emerges over time. Because as I grew, as I awakened myself, as I fulfilled what was awakening, as I matured in who I was, then I was able to articulate it, I was able to claim it, I was able to speak it, teach it, embody it, and now this is what I do. So this is a very normal, common way of sacred callings coming forward. But the other way that sacred callings come forward very commonly is through a lightning flash, a bolt of lightning. Like you wake up one morning and your life is in pieces all over the floor, and you go, you know what? I don't want to put this back together the way it was before. It may have worked then, it doesn't work now. Or it didn't work then, and it's not going to work now. And this lightning bolt can really happen usually in the middle of a life 2x4, and we've all had them. Divorce, loss, life-threatening illness, grief, financial setback, losing your job, whatever. And quite honestly, again, I'm going to say that these times can be grace-filled, because in the midst of that lightning bolt experience, all of a sudden, you realize that there is something else for me. Now, I know this because, quite honestly, my sacred calling has come forward in both ways. You know, I talk about the gradualness, or in 2005, when I started teaching the wisdom school, and that I couldn't articulate it. But before that in my life, for many years, I had several lightning bolt experiences where I got glimpses and flashes and pictures of what I was to do in my life. And I started on a journey to find out what that was. And again, it unfolded over many years. And yet, these were experiences that I could not deny. And I think that is also why sacred callings finally get our attention a lot of times in our life, is we can't deny it anymore. We cannot turn away from it. We just say, now is the time. And that was what happened for me when I joined that mastermind I talked about in the first video, and realized that now is the time. If I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And there was no more waiting. So this is often how sacred callings come forward. So the first question in your study guide on chapter 2 is, how has your sacred call made itself known in your life? And I really hope you spend some time with this. Everyone is going to be different, but perhaps in me speaking of it in this way, you're going to see, yeah, that was kind of like the way it showed up for me. Well, and you might say, well, how do I know it is a sacred call? In the event that I do in August, we actually spend a whole day getting in touch with the sacred calling, articulating it, bringing it forward. But I want to say right now that sacred calls have everything to do with the essence and the blessing of who you are. It's already inside of you. The seed of a sacred call was planted inside of you when you were born. You came in with it this lifetime. I call it your divine blueprint. And it unfolds and sits down its roots and pushes up through, the dirt over your life. And it has everything to do with what you are truly committed to in your life. What you would commit your life to. And sacred calls for many of us are very, very big, Maybe it's peace on earth. That's a common one, let's say. Or maybe it's eradicating hunger on the planet. Or maybe it has something to do with children or animals. Or the environment, the planet, a food source. There's so many areas it shows up in. Working with the elderly. And yet the essence of what that is what your sacred calling is. And then how you express it out here in the world is your sacred ambition. So for instance, this video series is part of my sacred ambition. It's how I'm expressing my sacred calling. But so is my event that I do in August, and so is the books that I'm writing, and so is the classes I teach, and so is the one-on-one mentoring that I do. All of it, is my sacred ambition. But my sacred calling is what really is the source, the juice, the fire that fuels everything that I do. It's what gets me up in the morning. It's what keeps me going. It's what keeps me inspired on this journey. And all of this I'm going to talk about because when I get to the chapter on what it really takes to do this. So when you take a look at the question, how has your sacred call made itself known in your life, and describe the way your sacred calling has emerged in your life, I'm hoping those two questions will really assist you in articulating it for yourself. And please don't worry if you don't have the words yet, because this can be part of the early parts of the journey in the sacred calling. And I'm going to talk more about the phases of sacred callings in my next video. But in this chapter, on chapter 2, I go on and I talk about, the different times that sacred callings can show up. I talk about being in our 20s and being in a disillusionment. We're disillusioned a lot in our 20s, aren't we? Yes, we are. Because we start in our 20s with so bright-eyed about, my life's going to be like this, and, this is what's going to happen here, and blah, blah, blah. And by the time we get to 30, we go, things aren't working out exactly the way I thought. So disillusionment is part of the 20s. And sacred callings can show up at that time. And yet we may not be ready, So we go on with our life. And then we get to our 40s, and then maybe there's been a 2x4 that's happened, a divorce or a loss, or we just kind of look around and go, how did I get here? This wasn't what I thought my life was going to be about. So sometimes it shows up in the 40s in that way. Or when we're in our 50s and there's an empty nest going on. The kids have gone off to college. Or we have, decided to do something different with our life. And we're going, well, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? I put all my energy into taking care of my family, providing for my family, making sure they had the best this and that. And now what? And then it can even happen later in life, in our 60s, even 70s. We are retired from our career. Maybe we've had a very successful career. And yet we have put on the back burner something that was very deep within us. And now is the time. So I hope all of those ways that I'm talking about this will help spark you as you sit with yourself and say, how has my sacred calling come forward? And how is that spoken? That's the word. Spoken to me over all these years. And know that everything that you have been through, all of your experiences have been part of your sacred calling to you. And your longing, that deep longing you have inside, that place that touches you so deeply, is your response to that. So I hope you give yourself some time to really articulate that for yourself. And then on page 7, here's ways in which sacred callings people often say about their sacred callings. And this is a few examples. I always knew I had a powerful connection to the theater. And then now, look what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, we know as a child that we have a powerful connection to something. Or, I felt for a long time that I had a job, work, mission to do, although what it was eluded me. And this is often, again, how sacred callings can show up. It's like, this is close, but it's not quite it. Or, I was 19 years old when I heard a voice behind me that said, you are going to be a pastor. And it freaked me out. And I said, not me. This can also be one of the ways that sacred calling can show up. It just is like, whoa, I don't think so. I have always known that I had a sacred calling, and I thought that having one was special. What changed was realizing that it's true for everyone. Yeah, sometimes we have a sacred calling, we sort of nurse it and, think it's so special inside that we have it. And it is special, and yet we don't realize that, everyone has one. And then I can see now that I was called from time to time. I can see now that I was called from the time I became a conscious young adult. Yes, often sacred callings show up when we are a young adult. But then life takes over and we find ourselves doing all kinds of things. And then later in life is when we come back around to it and go, you know, that was there back in my 20s kind of thing. Okay, so I hope all of that was helpful to you. And I'm going to stop here and continue chapter 2 in the next video because I want to get into the 3 phases of sacred calling. So, bye for now. See you next time.